first-time applicants are encouraged to apply. So if this is your first time working with the Arts or Humanities Council, please don't hesitate to reach out and get support as you work on your application. We look forward to reading about some new organizations and the work that you're doing. There are 3 grant award sizes depending on the annual budget size of your organization. And the only financial information that we'll be asking you to upload as a part of your application is a profit and loss statement from 2019. So that's pre-COVID pandemic, looking to get a kind of baseline of your organization's size and scale. And don't worry about, if your fiscal year is January to December, great, submit us your 2019 profit and loss. If you're a July through June, that's okay to submit your FY19 P&L consistent with your regular fiscal year. Do want to note in particular that grant awards can be used retroactively to cover expenses incurred after March 15th of 2021. So you can look back a couple of months and cover expenses that you have already had with this grant funding, and there is no match requirement. In terms of how you can use funds, there are slightly different eligibility eligible uses of funding, depending on whether it's an arts or a humanities grant application. We'll ask you at the beginning to specify which type of funding you're applying for. So if it's an arts organization, the funding can be used to support general operating support for your day-to-day businesses, business operations. So that would be staff salaries, stipends or fees to artists, facility costs, costs associated with health and safety, and marketing and promotion costs for the general day-to-day operations of your organization. So what you're looking for funding for should be a part of what you traditionally do and would not be a new or a special program if you're looking at the arts funding. For the humanities side, funding can be used for the general operations of your organization. Again, rent, utility, lighting, insurance. It can also be used specifically for humanities programming, strategic planning, capacity building efforts, consultants related to transitioning to more digital programming and increased accessibility, expansion to outdoor or virtual programming because of COVID, or equity assessments and planning related to COVID-19. So slightly different eligible uses of funding if you're applying for the humanities bucket. Funds cannot be used for a number of things that you can read here, and just want to note that as per usual with most grants, if you already have funds for certain work, this funding cannot duplicate funding for expenses that you've already received grant funds for. And again, cannot be used for expenses incurred before March 15th. There is a panel that will be reviewing the grant, and some of the things that they'll be looking at, in addition to the special consideration that I mentioned before, is understanding what, if any, financial hardship your organization has had as a result of COVID-19. Specifically looking to understand whether you've been at a risk of permanently closing your organization, a significant loss of revenue, loss of paid staff, or use of your space. In the application, they'll be asked to, as best as you can, estimate the gross and the net revenue loss if you're able to. And so the gross would be the total amount of revenue that you did not receive compared to a normal year. And the net loss would be that gross minus any mitigating additional revenue that you received or any reduction in expenses. And the grant review panel will also be looking across all the applications to fund a diverse range of organizations and disciplines, geographic locations, and backgrounds. And again, we're looking to sort of understand the story of loss from your organization over the last year. We'll also be looking to understand the quality of your organization's work, the ability to carry out the work, how these funds might impact the arts and humanities workforce, how well the work aligns with your mission, compensation for artists or presenters, and how your organization is working to engage underserved populations. The grant review process includes 4 external reviewers from different organizations, disciplines, and areas of the creative sector, in addition to the Humanities and Arts Council staff. After the deadline, the panelists will use the criteria that I just mentioned as a guide to evaluate and score proposals, and they will meet later this fall to discuss proposals from our second round and make funding recommendations. In terms of important dates, you'll note that there are 2 rounds for this Cultural Recovery Grant Program. The first round has already closed, and those grants have been awarded. There is a second round that is due September 14th by 5 p.m. There is a total of 1.1, almost 1.2 million available through this program. 2/3 of that funding, $725,000, have been awarded in round 1, and that leaves $435,000 to be awarded in round 2. And so that's still a significant amount of funding available to distribute to arts and humanities organizations. And any applicants that applied for round 1 but did not receive funding at this time are automatically carried over and will be considered in round 2. In terms of activities funded by this work, the work must begin by December 1st of this year and end no later than November 30th of next year, 2022. Grant applicants will be awarded be notified of the decision about their application about 3 to 4 weeks after submission. And the final report for this grant is due at the end of next year, November 30th, 2022. Tips for preparing a strong application. Please start well before the deadline. Make sure you have an opportunity to get into the grant portal. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and make sure you can work your way through all the application questions and have all the materials that you need to be submitted, and give yourself plenty of time to do that. Don't assume anything, especially do not assume that the panel reviewers know anything about your organization or the community that you're working. So please do not use acronyms. Tell us about who you are and the work that you're doing in this clear and directive way, and speak in your own words to tell us a story. We're not looking for professional grant writers to prepare these applications. We want to understand who you are in your own words about the work that you're doing and why it matters to your community and how this year has been for your organization and what your plans for recovery are. I want to note that all applications funded by the councils must comply with access policies and laws, and looking to support programs that are welcoming and inclusive, and doing everything it can to reduce accessibility barriers and to make the arts and humanities available for all. To give you a preview of the grant final report, some of the things that we'll be looking for are data around the audiences that you've reached, including in-person audiences, your total audience that you might have reached online as best as you're able to estimate, who was paid with the funding, artists, scholars, employees, and how the funds helped sustain your organization through this pandemic, as well as a sense of any future losses that you might expect. Also going to be looking for specifics about how the grant funds were spent in alignment with the eligible expenses. And always, photos and stories are so critical for helping tell the importance and the power of this work and securing more resources for the future. And so your images about the great work that you're doing help us advocate for the arts generally. I'll spend a second talking about the grant portal and how you'll apply online. Please note that if you have not applied in the last month or two for a grant through the Vermont Arts Council, you will need to register and create a new account through their portal. And so you can, the screen is showing you where you can access the grant contact information on the Vermont Arts Council website. There is similar information on the Vermont Humanities Council. Go to COVID recovery and apply for a cultural grant. click the Apply Online button. Again, this is a new and different online grant system, and it will take some time to get you set up. So please start your application early. Again, reminder, it does have to be approved by the grant administrator, and that'll take 1 or 2 business days. So click Register down at the bottom. It will take you to a sign-in page where you will, if you're applying on behalf of an organization, which you will need to do, you'll need to provide a work email address. Do not enter a generic info@email address. If you don't have an email through your organization, please provide the best email to contact you. So you're going to select the organization, and it will allow you to search organizations that are already preloaded into the system. So search, that will allow you to find whether the organization already exists in there. If not, it will navigate you to a screen to add a new organization. Under contact info, copy the information from the organization to populate the contact fields for one that is already existing. If you do not find your organization, select Create New Organization, and that will walk you through the process of filling out all of the tax ID information and address and website. Once you've registered, you'll be redirected to the main page of the grant portal. Your name and organization should appear as it is here. It says Meredith Bell under the Vermont Arts Council under the image. And as I mentioned before, all new users will need to require approval before you can access the application. And so you won't be able to see the application at all until it's been approved. So give yourself some time to create the account. And then once you're approved, you'll be able to navigate to find the grant application. So this is the portal. You can go to, you'll want to navigate to Organization Applicant. Click on Available Grants, and that will allow you to see the COVID recovery grant as an option. So Organization Applicant, Available Grants, down below, there's the COVID-19 recovery grant application, which includes guidelines, frequently asked questions, and all of the application questions. Highly recommend that you save often as you go to make sure you don't lose your work. If you want to preview your application, you can always click through all of the tabs without answering the question. So you'll see down here, there's guidelines, FAQ, recovery funding, financial relief. You can scroll through and check out the whole application without having to answer all of the questions. But obviously, before you submit your application, all the questions must be completed before it'll allow you to submit. Again, that's sort of navigating through the questions. You can always access your application through My Saved Applications. Again, log in, go to the organization applicant, scroll down to My Saved Applications to get back to work on your application. For folks who have, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can right now, but if you'd like to talk more with me one-on-one about your application, if you have questions or want to double check your eligibility, please don't hesitate to sign up for a 30-minute phone or Zoom chat with me. You can book a time online from the Arts or Humanities webpage for this grant. You can also shoot me an email at the email address there or give me a call. Would love to talk with you about your work. My job is to be here to help support you through this and submit the most competitive application you can. So don't hesitate to reach out. And I think that's all I got for right now, and we can open it up to your questions and conversation.
Okay, thank you, Katherine. We'll begin with a question from Marissa. If our application is being carried over due to not receiving funding in round 1, should we add anything to our initial application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if things have changed since you applied, you should definitely reach out directly to me and provide me with that information so that we can update the application or add an addendum to your application for panel reviewers to consider. So if something has changed since you originally applied, reach out and let me know. Some applications were carried over in part to just sort of get a better sense of the full pool before making a determination. It doesn't mean that the panel wasn't really interested in your work and excited to try to award a grant, but for certain reasons wanted to sort of see the full pool. The panel may have had some specific questions. And so if you'd like to reach out to me directly to better understand if any changes could make your application more competitive, don't hesitate to send me an email and we can set up a time to talk more specifically about your application. And certainly if you'd like to make changes between now and the next round, we can make that happen.
Okay, question from Melissa. In the grant application, what is organization discipline?
Yeah, so there is a, I think, pre-populated list of common arts and humanities disciplines. Like, are you a dance organization, or are you a museum, or do you do another type of arts education? So there's a pre-populated list of disciplines. Find the type that best describes the work that you do, and that will help us sort of better understand across all of the applications, the diversity of disciplines that are applying and making sure that diverse sectors are funded with this work. But don't sweat that one too hard. No one is going to be denied or receive funding based on the discipline type that they select. We want to understand how this year has been a hardship for your organization and the importance of the work that you do for your community.
Okay, this is from Molly. I've applied for a VAC, Vermont Arts Council, General Operating Grant. I believe notifications will go out the end of August. If I receive this grant, am I still eligible to apply for the COVID recovery grant?
Yes, absolutely. If you've received any type of recovery funding prior to this, or you are still have a pending application, that does not impact your eligibility to apply for this funding.
Okay, this is from Peter. We have previously received ARPA support from Vermont Humanities and the Arts Council. We are not a 501c3, but I've had the same nonprofit umbrella supporting organization for a number of years. Did you imply that in this round, my organization will not be eligible?
Yes, unfortunately, NEA and NEH had made a different determination with this funding than the previous relief grants from NEA and NEH. So while previously organizations that operate under a fiscal agent have been eligible to receive funds, that is not the case this round. And unfortunately, that's something that the Vermont Arts and Humanities Council does not have any control over, but want to make sure that all the organizations doing good work receive some support in some way, if at all possible. So don't hesitate to reach out to the Arts or Humanities Council directly and may be able to steer you towards other funding that you would be eligible to apply for with a fiscal agent.
David asks, is a list of previous organizations who have been approved for a grant available? I can drop into the chat a list of the organizations that received CARES Act grants last year, which is not exactly the same as the grants that we're speaking about. But Catherine, I don't believe we've yet notified organizations from the first round, so we don't have a list yet of those organizations, if that's correct.
Applicants who applied in round one have been notified whether they were awarded the grant or whether they are being carried over to round two. So if you have applied, you should have received notification of whether you were funded or whether you're being considered in round two. I'm not sure at what point that list is being made public. That's something that I can check with the leadership at the Arts and Humanities Council on. I know that at the end of both round one and two, there will be a full list made available to the public, but whether that is being shared between the rounds, I do not have the answer for right now.
So I just dropped into the chat the list of the CARES Act recipients from 2020. Those were, again, slightly different grants. Some received humanities grants, some received Arts Council grants, and some were a combination of arts and humanities. Could you repeat your email address, Katherine, for people, and I'll type it into the chat for people to reach you at?
Yeah, and I just put it in the chat again.
Okay, got it.
We've had a little bit of an issue with the bounce back on the kind of generic VT COVID relief at Gmail. So the folks seem to be having more success with my direct email, katherine.sims@gmail.com.
Okay, follow up to Peter's question about 501c3 in a nonprofit umbrella organization. In this case, should the umbrella organization apply?
So any 501c3 organization that is arts or humanities can apply to support their programs. There need to be a strong case made that the work that is being funded is a part of that organization's work. And so a likely, the sort of typical fiscal agent with supporting a separate organization is not a good fit for this grant application. And again, unfortunately, that's a determination made by NEA and NEH.
Question from Melissa. Can you clarify again how we submit FY19 info as a baseline, but how do we compare that to FY20 or somehow March 2020 to June 15, 2021?
Yeah, so we're looking for your profit and loss statement from 2019 to understand pre-pandemic what your organization size and scale was so that we can match it with the grant award, the appropriate grant award size based on your pre-COVID budget size. So again, if you're a January through December, submit us your 2019 P&L. If you're a July through June, send us your FY19 P&L. In terms of determining your gross and net loss, I think we're looking to you to help us understand what the usual sources of revenue for your organization are. And what you might have expected if COVID hadn't happened for that March 2020 to June 2021. So, what are the average grant awards that you received, or individual donations, or ticket sales that your organization saw that you did not receive during that time that you can, correlate with the impact of the pandemic. So that would be a sort of separate calculation that you're doing on your own, and then telling us how you got to that number, both the gross loss and then what your net loss was after you factor in maybe relief support that you received from some of the, ACCD grants or previous rounds of Vermont Arts and Humanities Council funding, and whether there was any reduction in expenses because you scaled back on your work because of the pandemic.
Okay, question from Meg. What does an organization need to do to prove hardship from COVID?
Yeah, we know that means different things to different organizations. And so we ask you, there are a series of check boxes to tell us whether you are, risked closure of the organization or had a loss of revenue or lost staff or access to a venue. And then there's also a significant narrative session where we're asking you to tell us in your own words what hardship has meant for your organization. Did you lose out on revenue? Did you have to furlough or lay off staff? Did you have to scale back on programming because those modalities weren't available because of COVID? So you tell us what this last year has meant for your organization and the hardships that you've encountered as a result of that. And, we're also excited to hear about any learnings or innovations that, or pivots that you made as a result of this year, and then what the future looks like for your organization. So we want to hear from you about the impacts of this last year in your own words. But we are asking you to estimate as best as you can financial losses, recognizing that organizations are of different sizes and scales. And so a $5,000 loss for one organization might be very small, but for another organization that might be really significant. And the panel will take that into consideration as it determines need for this grant for your organization.
Okay, question from Sue. Our organization is located entirely in cyberspace, with staff and board members based all around the United States. How geographically tied to Vermont must we be to be eligible? The executive director, as well as many of our affiliated artists, are based in Vermont.
That's such an interesting question, and so fitting of these times when so much is virtual. So we are looking for organizations to be registered with the Secretary of State in Vermont, that your sort of home office or that the organization is registered in Vermont as a sort of baseline of eligibility. If your organization is incorporated in another state, we suggest you reach out to the Arts or Humanities councils within that state, because they will have similar funding that you may be better suited to apply for there. But if you are incorporated in the state of Vermont, you are eligible to apply. Certainly, in terms of impact, the panel is going to be interested in hearing how Vermonters, either artists or audiences, benefit from the work that you're doing and in order to be competitive, we'll want to see that Vermonters are benefiting from the work of your organization. But again, that kind of baseline is incorporation within the state.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. Why don't we wait a moment or two, see if folks have anything else they'd like to type into the chat for Katherine to answer. And thanks for sending your questions in. We'll give 10 or 15 seconds here for folks to type things in if they have anything else.
Yeah, great. And just add. This is a significant grant pool of funding. As I mentioned originally, almost 1.2 million between the two organizations. 2/3 of that nearly has already been allocated, but that still leaves $435,000 available in the second round. And the goal is to get those dollars out to as many organizations who are doing arts and humanities programming across the state. And we recognize that hardship has meant different things to different organizations, but want to encourage everyone who meets the eligibility criteria to apply for these funds. And if you have any additional specific questions that you want to talk through with me one-on-one, please don't hesitate to go to the Arts and Humanities Council website. There's a link to sign up for a one-on-one session with me, or shoot me an email if that's an easier way to go back and forth with you.
And I'll drop that link to sign up for a one-on-one session here into chat in just a moment. Peter wanted to clarify and confirm that libraries are indeed eligible.
So libraries that have a 501c3 status, or an affiliate group like the Friends of the Library that has a 501c3 status, is eligible to apply for humanities programming. They are not eligible for the general operating funds. We know that the state has a separate pot of funding that has been distributed directly to libraries to help cover their general operating support. And so this grant program is focused on humanities programming for libraries that have 501c3 status.
Okay, during the first round, question from Guinevere, what was the biggest mistake? Perhaps what she means is by organizations that submitted applications. Was it just not explaining the organization's story well enough?
Yeah, that's a good question. Depends a little bit on the organization, but I think one thing that maybe came up a number of times was looking for real clarity as best as you're able to sort of describe the financial need for this grant support to help your organization move forward. We recognize that folks have done some really awesome things to pivot and to move forward, and that's really wonderful, and we want to hear about that. And also, if there's a gap between your usual revenue that you might have expected to receive. We want to hear about that as sort of specifically as possible. I think the other kind of common mistake is, again, assuming that panel reviewers know about your organization already and the work that it's doing, and tell us as if we're a person off the street who start at the beginning about your mission, your programs, who you serve. Also, maybe the sort of third piece is really want folks to lean into the special consideration piece about how you are serving or led by groups that are often underrepresented and under-resourced in the arts and humanities sectors. So how are you seeking to reach a diverse audience and being inclusive in your work and bringing folks into leadership within your organization?
Question from David. Our organization is primarily volunteers and we have a low budget. Does this mean that a grant would be small as well?
Yeah, so there are 3 tiers of awards. Organizations with less than a $250,000 annual budget will receive a $5,000 grant. If you're between $250,000 and $1 million, you receive a $10,000 grant award. And if you're over $1 million, it's a $15,000 grant. And so for small organizations, especially if you don't have staff, I think a $5,000 grant can be pretty significant and meaningful. And so sorry, I got the levels wrong there. It's $250,000 to $750,000 is the $10,000 grant. And if you're over $750,000, it's a $15,000 grant. Sorry for that miscommunication. Again, small organizations, a $5,000 grant might be pretty significant. And we tried to make the application as sort of simple and straightforward as possible so that filling it out wouldn't be a barrier for small organizations. And so we encourage, even if you're primarily volunteers and have a modest budget, we do encourage you to take a look at this. And certainly you will, organizations of all sizes and scales are eligible to access these funds. And we recognize that financial hardship and loss means different things to different size organizations. And so, tell us your story.
Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll hang out here for another 10 seconds or so and see if one last couple other questions come in. And we can stay as long as the questions are coming, but thanks to all of you for showing up, and we hope that you'll apply for the grants.
I think I see someone is raising a hand, although that disappeared. Okay. Again, we're here for follow-up if needed. Great to have an opportunity to walk through this all with you, and wish you all the best in preparing your applications, and we look forward to reading them and getting these dollars out the door to all of you who are doing critical work in the creative sector here in Vermont. You're essential for our state's recovery.